Good morning, everybody. My name is Kif Scheuer. Thank you for joining us for the CivicSpark Returning Project Partner Orientation for the 2019-2020 service year. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping notes. I am recording this webinar, and so you will be able to share it with your colleagues afterwards. I'll also send out the slides afterwards. And if you have questions as I'm talking, you can type them into the chat or Q&A bar. I'm not sure why there's two in the system, but there is. And hopefully, we did this in an hour last time, and I hope we'll keep it to an hour or less today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about CivicSpark and AmeriCorps at a high level. Some of this will be a reminder for some of you, but I'm also revisiting it for the purpose of setting and grounding ourselves for the year. We'll review the main implementation elements of CivicSpark and all the pieces and what it is and how it works. We'll talk about roles and responsibilities a little bit, and then I'll outline some next steps. There's a couple points where I will take a pause for questions, but as I noted, you can ask me questions as we go forward. So there will be a program guide coming. Those of you who had a site supervisor handbook last year, we're sort of merging this together with the fellow handbooks. There's not two different documents. There'll be one document. Some of the content, there'll be appendices in the fellows version that you guys won't have because it won't be relevant to you. So we're trying to make a more streamlined documentation interface, but that will come and some of this will be in there. So diving right into CivicSpark and AmeriCorps as a whole, I want to start by saying, why is this orientation important for returning partners? Some of you have been with us for several years, but for me, I've been doing this for a long time. I think it's an amazing program. I think you're here because you think it's an amazing program, but it works because we've built up a fair amount of structure that's intended to support success for both you as partners and the fellows. And so it's important at the start of the year that we refresh the context for our program foundation and the boundaries we have to operate within. We re-emphasize some of the links between our mission, our activities, and the implementation. And we clarify our understanding of core activities and how these pieces fit together and remind ourselves of our key roles. Some of this is a reframing of work that has been out there, but as I've taken over the program directorship more fully, I'm trying to lift up some of these core activities a little bit more in ways that I hope are useful to you to understand what we do and why we do it. So, you all are familiar with our program as having 3 tracks. You heard that maybe we were going to combine into one program, but we did not. We were not successful in getting that application approved. We're going to make a run at it again this year, but for this current year, we are in the program structure you see before you. 50 climate fellows, 20 opportunity access fellows, and 20 what we're calling resiliency fellows. It's a bit of a long story, but we had to let go of, well, we did let go of the water contract when we applied for the combined program. And while California volunteers did not give us the full combined program, they did allow us to replace the water track with the resiliency program model. So all of the water projects are actually in the resiliency track, and we hope eventually the whole program will have a resiliency frame that will include all the issues that we're working on, but right now that's how we're structured. It's always good to come back to the purpose of AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps was designed as the domestic Peace Corps with this idea that people serving could address defined needs, needs in areas such as education, disaster services, health, environmental stewardship. And what's really important for you all to sort of keep in mind, and I don't think we've done as good a job in the past of lifting this up, is that national service is not work. National service is functionally the same as joining the military or the Peace Corps. It is a commitment of service for a period of time for which there are benefits, but it is fundamentally not work. And this has bearing on sort of the benefits they get, the way they're treated by the Fed, some of our employment categorizations. It's also important to understand because they're serving our country and California by addressing the needs we've defined through our program model. And we want to sort of keep that in mind when we think about how we integrate our fellows into our teams. They are part of your team, but we do want to always recognize that they're not working, they're not employees. So one thing that is sort of common and unifies all AmeriCorps programs are these three goals: getting things done, fellow development, and strengthening communities. Getting things done is the service work that AmeriCorps members do, and it's the variety of tasks and activities that have a benefit for some community need. Fellow development is the idea that we're not only trying to do work, but we're trying to lift up the individuals who serve and also maybe inspire them to hold a community service or national service model in their future careers. And strengthening communities is the aspect of the program around volunteer engagement, this idea that if AmeriCorps members and fellows are serving in communities, they can also be helping engage more citizens in the issues that they're working on. And it's important to understand this because this is where our program design flows from, and ultimately what we need to feedback and align with. No matter how much we are our own program, we are part of the AmeriCorps family, and we want AmeriCorps to see themselves in what we do and who we are. So this is our particular vision and mission, and you may be familiar with it. I'm not going to go into it in depth. I think the vision lays out our larger sort of overall where we want California to be going and what we think a good, strong California looks like. Our mission is a little bit more important in this context because there's three elements. We are trying to contribute to our vision by building local public sector capacity, serving as a social purpose career accelerator, and fostering lasting, authentic community engagement. This is kind of how we've taken the core goals of AmeriCorps and turned it into a mission, which in turn we then turn into our core activities. So as with all other AmeriCorps programs, we have these three pieces: getting things done, strengthening communities, and fellow development. We articulate how we're doing that through our mission, and we implement that through three main activities that we're involved in: the capacity building projects for public agency beneficiaries, which is what you all are mostly involved in; the volunteer engagement projects, which you're familiar with but you don't play a major role in; and the professional development activities that we put on, but also that happen through the on-the-job experience that you're very much a part of. While we have three core activities, they're not equally emphasized in terms of what the fellows do throughout the year. Our core activities are heavily weighted towards the getting things done or capacity building side of things, which is about 80% of the fellows' time. The fellow development, the stuff we do for our trainings with regional trainings, etc., is only about 15% of their time, and volunteer engagement is about 5% of their time. So a lot of what we're thinking about is how, when we look at this, the capacity building piece is really the main show of what CivicSpark is about. So with that context, an overview of how we fit into the CivicSpark structure, I want to go through and spend a couple minutes talking about some specific AmeriCorps policies. These are, I hope, familiar to you. I am going to, again, re-emphasize them. In part, we are required to provide this information. We want to make sure it's in front of you all as you think about having your fellows. Other policies and programs are embedded in our agreements or detailed in the program guide. These are the key ones that we need to revisit every year. All AmeriCorps members have to be U.S. citizens. As a domestic program, it was set up this way: so a citizen or a lawful permanent resident, be at least 17-year-old and have a background check, and they can't drop out of school in order to serve. In California, it's a little different in some states, but fellows here cannot serve until they complete their background checks and the results are considered. We are initiating those for anybody who's been accepted. If your agency is one of the few folks who've told us you need an additional background check, we really want to let the fellow know. We want to get that done so that it's not a barrier to them starting on September 3rd. By now, I hope many of you have pored over the list of prohibited activities that the Corporation for National and Community Service has provided. These are in statute, in federal statute, and it was part of your application. It's been part of the agreement that we have with you. I am not going to walk through these today. I hope that they are familiar to you. The things that I want to mention today for you are all fellows can engage in these activities on their own time, but not while recording hours or in uniform. So when we talk about prohibited activities, we are only talking about these as being applicable when they're serving as AmeriCorps members. Also, if we do find out that fellows are serving, we have to release folks for cause. This year, something new. We will be asking fellows to put a poster, an 8.5 by 11 poster up in their cube or something, alongside the AmeriCorps poster we've had them putting up previously with the prohibited activities, just so they're there in front of you. AmeriCorps is just taking a sort of wanting to make sure that's even more clearly on folks' mind as they go forward. More important to talk about with you all, even as returning partners, is the concept of allowable activities. I think this is not something that we have as clearly articulated before. It's in our agreement, but it is something I really want to sort of center for you all as we think about the service that the fellows are providing. So an allowable activity is something aligned with the three main activities that we are signed up for: capacity building, fellow development, volunteer engagement. Unallowable is anything else. We can only have fellows serving on allowable activities. We've created a really broad bucket for particularly capacity building, but we do need to be able to show and draw a line between their activities and those allowable activities. And fellows can't serve on things that are unallowed, like service unconnected to a local public agency beneficiary or non-project related administrative tasks, things related to startup of CivicSpark as a program and our relationship as the program operator or the closeout. Those are things that we do with you, but they're not part of the fellows service. If fellows serve on tasks that are unallowable, they can have those hours taken away, and we don't want that to happen. So it's really important to keep this in mind, especially around the capacity building work, because you can help us keep them within that framework, within that umbrella of allowable activities, because the fellows are going to want to be helpful. They're going to want to serve. They're going to want to engage in things going on in your community and your organization. And so it's important for you to help us keep an eye on this so that they don't stray out of there, so that we don't run into an issue where they're working on something that's unallowable and it gets disallowed. If you're ever unclear, please ask us. Just stop and don't ask them to do something and then retroactively ask us if it's allowable. Check with us first. Most of the time we can find a way to frame a lot of what's going on as an allowable activity, but if it isn't, we don't want anybody sort of being caught hung out there. Another concept that is, this one is not as critical, I think, for the day-to-day, but it is important to be mindful of, is that when AmeriCorps was set up, labor advocates were concerned, and I think rightly so, that it could be used as a way to replace employees with people who are not protected or not compensated fully. Therefore, AmeriCorps members cannot perform the services that would result in a paid employee losing a job or the failure to hire a paid employee. This is in our agreement with you. And functionally what it means is you don't want fellows doing things that are other people's jobs. It's part of the reason that we ask you as a returning partner to identify what the new capacity building activity is. It's why we talk to you about these roles and kind of keeping within the allowable activity space, because it makes it clear that this isn't somebody's job that you're just replacing with an AmeriCorps member. Turning to the general service expectations for the fellow more broadly, I want to highlight these first 2 points sort of mostly for you guys, because it seems to be a place of confusion year over year. So when AmeriCorps fellows serve, they are signing up to serve from the day they start to the day they end. And this year it's from September 3rd through August 2nd of the following year. They are signing up to serve full-time for that period of time. They're serving roughly 40 hours a week. The goal is that they reach at least 1,700 hours by the end of the service year. But that's an at least. That is not the target. That is not the upper limit. That is something at least we hope they reach to get their education award, but they are serving full-time for a fixed period of time, day in and day out, obviously with some time off built in and some holidays built in and other things. But if you're in a situation where your fellow is saying to you, oh, I've reached my limit, that may be incorrect. They're supposed to serve with you full-time until the last day of service. And some of them may approach you and say, look, I've got to move, I've got a job offer, can I end early? We can negotiate with you to have them exit early if they've completed all their requirements. as long as they've met that 1,700 hours, but we don't want you to feel like you're under pressure once they hit that 1,700 hours to let them go, because they've agreed to serve for a fixed period of time. During that period of time, their goal for us, for you, is to provide at least 1,300 hours of project activity. On average, we see about 1,375 last year, and about 1,775 total. So people are serving more than the minimum there. And they participate in other activities for the remaining balance, our training activities, etc. So I hope that's clear. Turning to the uniform expectation, this is another one where I think we have let slide at times what is required. I want to be absolutely clear. All AmeriCorps participants have to wear a uniform at all times whenever serving, no exceptions. Most programs have these full uniforms they wear, t-shirts or jackets or some sort of more traditional uniform that they wear. For CivicSpark, since we're serving in a lot of your offices, which are professional settings, it wasn't a great fit. And so we've been able to negotiate the option to utilize pins, one for AmeriCorps, one for CivicSpark, as our uniform. The simplicity of this uniform is really nice because it's adaptable to any clothes or environment. It's not intrusive. You can kind of look as fully professional as you want. But the simplicity also means people can forget. If someone is serving out of uniform and someone from CV or CNCS sees them, they can have their hours revoked. And again, we don't want that to happen. So please help us remind your fellows when you see them without their pins on that they are out of uniform and they should go get them right away, full stop. And keep us on track with that, because we want everybody to be recognized for the work they're doing, and this is one of the ways that we are required to represent that engagement. A little bit about branding. We also have some branding requirements. We want to recognize the support we get from the Corporation for National Community Service, from California Volunteers. We also want to help community members understand that AmeriCorps members are serving their needs. So we have to keep our branding in mind. It's not a major issue for you all, but we do require that there be some version of an AmeriCorps Serving Here poster. We will provide that to you. And ask that you display it somewhere on your site. Usually it's in the Fellows Cube, maybe somewhere else, but that is our requirement for you. Just touch on the benefits for 2019-20. As I hope you all are aware, we've been able to increase our stipend to $20,000 this year, which is, I think, a $3,000 increase on the base. We will have a modest cost of living adjustment again, though it won't be as significant as it has been in the past years. So more people are generally making more, but there won't be as much variation. The Education Award is a fantastic outcome. This year, the federal contribution is $6,095, and Governor Newsom was able to find budget to put an additional almost $4,000, bringing the total up to $10,000. So their total package is $30,000 for this year if they serve the full period. They get health care if desired. Food stamps are available if the income matches up. And this is one of the benefits of being an AmeriCorps Fellow. Your stipend does not count towards food stamps, forbearance on student loans, and child care. So I want to move into the heart of this presentation to talk about our implementation work and how we implement CivicSpark, to touch on kind of how those core activities are articulated. So as I noted, we have three things that we do: capacity building, fellow development, volunteer engagement. I'm going to go through each one, what it is, what it means, how we operationalize it, and I'm hoping through that you get a greater understanding of what each program is and why we ask you and our fellows to do things. So I'll start with the biggest one, capacity building. I think we all know that capacity building matters. You probably wouldn't have applied for CivicSpark if it didn't. But we want to kind of articulate our outlook on why it matters. So as I think you're very much aware, local government resources are very limited, which means that maintaining the status quo can take up a lot of time and effort. And there's less capacity to diagnose or respond to emerging threats. The threats that we face are often unprecedented in scale and complexity. Climate change is a new beast that is really bearing down on all of us. Our housing crisis has taken on dimensions that I don't think anybody was prepared for. So these things mean that we need new tools and resources to respond. The solutions to many of these complex problems are also often best addressed through integrated approaches that are harder to do if you're already having limited capacity. The time and effort to build new relationships, to look across silos even within your own organization can be challenging. And so, for all these reasons, persistent capacity gaps among local governments remain a significant factor in many of the challenges we see in California. So with that in mind, what do we mean by capacity building? It's kind of a vague term. Well, in AmeriCorps, it's a very specific term. It's a category of service that we fall into. We are not in environmental stewardship, though we do a lot of environmental stewardship activities. We're not in education, though. We certainly do some education. We are in capacity building. And AmeriCorps defines that as a set of activities that expand the scale, reach, efficiency, or effectiveness of programs and organizations. And capacity building activities are intended to support delivery models, respond to goals, and enable the organization to sustain more or better services. So the idea here is that our fellows are there to help the local governments that we're serving expand their scale, reach, and effectiveness of their programs. They're not really there to do the implementation of the long-term service activity. And that's a nuance that can often be a little hard to tease out, but our focus is on the agency's capacity building rather than the outcome in the community. Overall, we do this by starting with a definition of what the need is by the community, for the community, through the local government. Then we develop projects that we implement, and then we try to transition the knowledge and outcomes at the end so we can sustain some sort of capacity gains. There are 5 steps in our capacity building approach, and I'm going to walk through each of those. So step 1 is the pre-service capacity assessment, something some of you are filling out today, tomorrow, this week it may be. We're starting to get them pouring in. I'll certainly talk about the post-assessment, which is returning partners you're also filling out at this time of year. The pre-assessment is intended to set a baseline understanding of capacity needs and goals. And as we hope you're very clear on by now, it has to be completed by an eligible local government beneficiary, a local government agency staff person who's eligible as defined in the ways that we've defined it this year. And for those of you who come from the different tracks, we have created a uniform eligibility structure now that allows us to be consistent across the different tracks and hopefully also simplifies and ties it directly to the project activities. Excuse me. The most important part of the capacity assessment are the 3 goals that we ask you about. And the reason for that is we're trying to get a sense of what are your capacity building goals, not your long-term project, program, and community goals, but what are your capacity building goals for the work that our fellows are going to do. And we've broken it up, and it's taken some time to get to this place, but around 3 major areas. Agency understanding, which is your knowledge base. What do you as staff members know? Or what do the staff members you're working with know? Program development, which is the products or outputs, the resources that are developed. And then stakeholder engagement. What are the relationships that are going to allow me to carry this forward? All 3 of those contribute to your capacity, and so we allow you to nominate a different goal because different projects have a different variant of a mix of those, and so we want to understand how each project is going to help build knowledge, deliver resources, and build relationships. Something important to note here for those of you who are site supervisors and partners but may have other beneficiaries, if you're a nonprofit, if you're a state agency, we've obviously allowed for this setup. You wouldn't be here if we didn't, but when an NGO or state agency can host a fellow, while an NGO or state agency can host a fellow, you cannot be the beneficiary. And I know this has caused some confusion and tension and struggle over the years. This is our program design. It's what we set out to do and built into our mission from day one. And it is something that is an absolute that we have to stick with. We've built a really effective mechanism for doing it, but it's also really important that you take it seriously. That when we are, if we're placing a fellow with a state agency or a nonprofit and we ask you to identify and engage with those local government beneficiaries, we're not asking you to check a box. We're not asking you to just do something to do it. We're trying to really understand why, and I hope from this whole lead up you can understand why this is core for our mission and our activities to be able to connect to local governments and the legacy of work. We fully recognize that state agencies and nonprofits are often in a position of doing work that is meaningful and significant for local governments, and it does enhance their capacity, and that's why we allow for this setup. But it's also something that we really need to keep clear, that we are serving the local government. And so, you know, I hope that that explanation makes sense to everybody. And if there's ever a question, or if you feel like you're just doing it to do it, please check in with us so we can understand the dynamics of the situation. Because again, we don't want to end up in a situation where somebody comes along and says, you're not really serving a local government, because those would be unallowed hours. Our pre-assessment also includes some other capacity assessment questions. We've been scaling them back. This year's is the tightest and most focused ever. We dropped the policy and resource piece, which seemed to be not giving us a lot of useful information and was just extra questions to ask. So it's a much tighter pre-survey than ever before. The questions are also much more framed around the project activity. So hopefully we're gauging something that changes year over year, not something that maxes out after 1 year or two. The gap assessment is the first step that the fellow plays a role in. And the purpose here is really to provide context to ground service and capacity goals linked to local agency beneficiaries, to ensure that the goals that we're actually subscribing to are realistic and achievable within that 11-month time frame. It is not intended to replace or serve as a scope in a full sense. It is more of a compass exercise or a program alignment step. It's a high-level orientation and link between our program, your activities, and the needs of the local agency beneficiaries. The process, which I hope you all are familiar with by now, is the fellow reviews the capacity assessment, interviews staff, both the beneficiary, the site supervisor, if that's somebody different, others as needed, briefly reviews at a high level key policy or programmatic documents so they have a sense of where they are, what they're doing, and why. The content is a summary of that work, a high-level outline of the program plan, again, not a large scope, an initial transitional plan, what are we going to do at the close of service, and any needed refinements to capacity building goals. That's the most important part, and that's the place we really want you guys to dive in and engage with the fellows around. This is not just for us, because as you'll see at the bottom of those important considerations, the goals from the gap assessment form the boundary of allowable capacity building activities. So if we come in, or if anybody else comes in and says to a fellow, hey, what are you doing today? How does that connect to your capacity building goals? We want to be able to draw a line and say, yes, this research that I'm doing, this meeting that I'm holding, it is ultimately feeding into my larger goal of building understanding around X in this community. So it's important that you all buy in and look at these goals and take them seriously and don't just treat it as an exercise for us, because we're going to be asking, where's the alignment? And if things start to drift outside of that, we're going to need to stop and say, wait a second, what's going on? What can we do? Do we need to set up another beneficiary? Do we need to close out that project and start a new one? We really want to make sure that fellows don't do gap assessments without a capacity assessment, and they don't start primary service activities without a completed gap assessment. So this becomes a really important exercise that maybe you all have kind of left at arm's length and left up to the fellow and the and our regional coordinator, but it's important that you think about and engage in those goals and conceive of them as broadly as you can to give you the flexibility to do the project you want that reaches the goals you have for the period that we have. We're also trying to curtail the amount of time fellows are putting into it. Ideally, this should take 15 to 20 hours, and even less sometimes, but no more than 30 hours. These should not be going on for weeks and weeks. It's something that you do quickly, get a sense of things, submit, and sets the parameters for where we're going. I won't say a lot about service projects, even though it's the lion's share of the project activity, because everything you're doing is very unique. You all have varied projects. They tend to fall into the spectrum of research, planning, implementation activities. But we see these projects as the ultimate vehicle for capacity building. We've tried to get the setup, the pre-survey, the gap assessment out of the way as quickly as possible, move into the project work where most of the activity is going on. And this is where fellows will spend a significant amount of time implementing these defined projects. We are going to be more I guess, formally, though it should have been happening anyway, having fellows connect to beneficiaries at least monthly. We hope more substantially for those of you who are site supervisors. If you're the beneficiary, you're going to be talking to that person every week, so this may seem excessive, but we want to make sure that fellows are summarizing kind of where they're at for each beneficiary every month, so that we can make sure that that continuity is there. If you're a site supervisor and a beneficiary, you'll use it more as a touchstone with the regional coordinator for your check-ins with them than you will a proper progress report from the fellow. But it is going to be something you will see coming by email. The transitional activities, since you're all returning partners, you are in the thick of it right now. I mean, I guess many of your fellows are ending tomorrow, and so hopefully they've turned in everything they're doing. The goal here is really just to help create a more formal closure year over year. Many of you have projects that last for many years. Some of you see and question, why do we have to do these things each year? AmeriCorps thinks of things and is structured around a year of service, start to finish, with a measurable outcome. So even though you may have continuity, our fellows need to see this as a contained activity. It's also important for them as they think about wrapping up the work they do, as they think about handing over what they've done. We want to make sure that we can sort of wrap it up in a meaningful way. So there's some activity that will happen, a training, a staff engagement, a presentation to council, as well as the delivery of the report. Our report structure is meant to be a wrapper for whatever they're doing. We're not asking them to write a whole new report. We hope they aren't doing that, but hopefully folding in whatever deliverables and products they did for you into their report, so that they have they can sort of present in it in a consistent way. We also have them do the case study and poster so we can share outcomes more broadly. And then finally, the post-service capacity assessment. This is where we go back to the beneficiary, the local government staff person, to ask them, did we meet your goals? So there's a space to rate and comment on achievement of the 3 capacity building goals. We send an email, and many of you have gotten these recently, with the goals from the gap assessment, and we ask you to comment on those. We also go back to look at the general capacity of the organization, and this is what we use to determine our overall outcomes. Fundamentally, it's absolutely vital that every one of these gets turned in, because in our program, as much as great work happened, we can't count it unless we get a post-capacity assessment, because we can't then say this goal was set out and this goal was achieved. And it may feel like you're kind of done, you're moving on, you're doing whatever you're doing. Please take the time to do these, take the time to do them quickly, do them when we ask you to. I don't want to have to remind you over and over again, because I can't say that your fellow from this past year's work achieved anything without this. So I hope you can help us get these done in a timely fashion. Now I'm going to move on to fellow development and then volunteer engagement. These are briefer as far as what we have for you here today. So overall, our approach to fellow development is that our fellows should be trained to be effective in their service, but also that we want them to grow as professionals, to think about a social purpose career as a long-term destination. Fellow development occurs in many places through both structured and unstructured activities, and broadly we see this in 3 major ways. First, we see it happening through the day-to-day experience of working with you all on their service projects. While we don't track that as fellow development, the on-the-job experience we fully recognize is the most meaningful and impactful developmental opportunity this program has to offer. It's why we are so engaged with returning partners who we feel like can offer a good developmental experience. We also offer structured training opportunities throughout the year. Over the last 5 years, we've built, I think, a pretty strong program of direct and remote trainings and learning opportunities that are designed to enhance their service work and to cultivate their leadership. And finally, through the indirect support our staff provides through check-ins and professional guidance, it's not as often as you all, but these direct conversations can often be central to the fellow experience, as they provide a platform for the fellow to troubleshoot, talk about their goals and needs outside of the day-to-day project and organizational context. We also recognize, and I want to emphasize here, that the site experience is so central to the fellow's development. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the roles, but what they experience on your site is critical to their growth, and you play an important role. The projects, the activities, the stakeholders engaged, these are going to be key to their learning and growth. Our systems and processes support that, but they're not meant to replace it. What we do is intended to enrich or extend their service experience and complement it, not compete with your project work. So just summarize here the elements of our structured training program for the coming year. We have our orientation coming up September 3rd through 7th, mid-year gathering in February. We'll have our graduation, which I seem to have left off this slide. It happens in late July, it just happened. Thank you to all of you who were there. It was a great event. We also do regional trainings once a month. We have our statewide seminars once a month. We're replacing what we called sector calls with network calls this year. They'll still be grouped topically, but it's going to be more focused on network development through knowledge and peer learning. Leadership roles, some of you may be familiar with this. It's about 20 hours of service here that a fellow can spend supporting program activities like being on the equity committee, helping to do a regional newsletter, those kind of things. And then our service days, which while they're tracked as service, are structured opportunities, and we're also doing more peer learning during our service days to provide context. This is a pretty robust training program relative to a lot of AmeriCorps programs. I know sometimes some of you feel like, well, wait, these guys are out a lot, they have a lot of obligations. We feel, and I think the experience is borne out, that it really builds our cohort, it really builds their engagement, it hopefully builds their skill set in ways ultimately that feed their project activity and support for you. As you all know and have been involved with, we operationalize the fellow development piece by working with you all as partners and site supervisors to identify fellow growth areas, engage around them, and track progress. So we've got those three pieces. We've got the professional assessment at the start of the year, after about a month. Usually there's going to be some conversations that lead to it. It's intended to capture that baseline. I hope this was said to you in years past, but we want you to think about that first rating as setting a baseline for that person. Like, where are they at? Not how good do you feel about them in the honeymoon phase of your early days with them, but where are they at today? Because when we come back to you at the end of the year, we want you to think about where have they grown from that baseline. And that forms the basis of a conversation about how to realize their goals. Mid-year, we do a check-in, we look at progress, we identify corrections, we talk about what we can do for the remainder of the year, and hopefully think about life after CivicSpark. And then at the end of the year, we do that third 360 evaluation. You come in, you get to rate them again and look at where they've grown, and then discuss what achievements we've had and where this is taking this fellow. And so hopefully this provides a framework for you, your fellow, our regional coordinators, to engage in growth and development throughout the year, but it's by no means the only conversations that will happen. I'm sure you talk to your fellows on a more regular basis, and certainly we do, about what they're learning and how this is helping them grow. The last piece is volunteer engagement, and the purpose of this and the value of volunteer engagement is really multi-layered. So by having fellows support volunteers to address community needs related to our track issues, like opportunity access, climate, resiliency, we're helping communities adapt existing programs to hopefully increase engagement, building those volunteer activities, the number of people serving on certain issues, and hopefully engaging volunteers in the issues and policies and goals that you have as local governments. For fellows, it's a professional development activity as they get to be engaged and have some leadership, builds an understanding of communities and needs, and for our program, it helps link together all the activities and increases the scale of our impact. As an approach, we have fellows, we give them some autonomy to develop a project that aligns their interests and can be a professional development opportunity because they get to pick and work with some community organization, usually of interest. They're required to identify some means to increase volunteer engagement by either establishing programs or enhancing programs, such as finding a community group or an event that they want to support. They work with our staff to determine the most appropriate type and approach that they're going to take. They get to spend 100 hours on this out of the whole year. It's not a ton of time, and we hope that they quickly find an organization they're interested in and spend most of the time supporting volunteerism with that organization. We are really pushing fellows to do it more locally this year. over the last couple of years in some regions, they've kind of drifted towards doing it as a group. And that's honestly cost us a lot in travel. And we're really going to encourage them to stay local also because we want them to be grounded in the communities they're serving. You don't need to engage with or manage this piece of the program, but it is helpful to be aware of. And if you have relevant community groups or even volunteer programs, certainly talk to your fellows about it because it's an opportunity for them to connect with things that are already going on and hopefully beneficial to you. So that's the summary of our 3 main activities. I hope that that's been helpful kind of build up for you guys. Excuse me. There will be a more extended and detailed summary in the program guide. For each track, we're going to be providing all partners and fellows with a detailed summary of our actual grant performance requirements so that you can see the targets, the goals, the measures, the instruments all laid out in one place so that you can understand better. We started doing this past year with water because we had a site visit that we had to do, and it was really helpful. I see Alyssa's on the phone and she was part of that process, and I can say that certainly from an audit perspective, California Volunteers was blown away because our fellows and our partners knew exactly how we do things. It was really beneficial, and it really inspired me to make and front load this a little bit more. And so you'll be seeing that document and hopefully become more familiar with the ways that we operationalize things. And hopefully this session has been helpful in that regard. So I can take a break for questions, or I can power on through the roles piece. Oh, here we go. Got a question from Adam. How much communication do you recommend we have with our fellow before they start with us? That's a great question. Definitely good to reach out. Certainly if they're relocating, we're actually going to be sending you guys all a request in the next few days. If you have any leads on housing resources, that's always a big demand. So we're going to be trying to get some information. So reach out and connect, find out if they're getting settled. You are free to share information with them about your project. Talk to them as much as you want, since any time they spend with you at this point is volunteer time on their part. I wouldn't want to burden them immensely, but it can be a great opportunity to get to know them a little bit, see if they have questions, certainly helping them get oriented to your community if they're relocating. And it just helps them know there's somebody there who cares, frankly. They're not, if they're moving across the country and they're not going to see you till September 10th and it's only August 1st right now, it's great to build a little connection. Not seeing any other questions, I'll go ahead to the next section. I'm going to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. We're changing things up, not in a functional way, but just how we're framing this a little bit as we from past years. You all would have probably signed, I believe, a site supervisor fellow agreement. As I took on the role of program director more fully, one of the things I was looking at was, what is that agreement doing? What are we using it for? It actually was just a repeat of a lot of things that are in your contract and their contract. It wasn't as useful, I think, and so what we wanted to do is reframe this around the fact this is a 3-way relationship. We wanted to rebuild that document, which is almost done now, into more of a shared expectations document, a little less about the details, a little more about the intent, and bring us into it. So our regional coordinators will sign that as well. So we're seeing this as a 3-way relationship, and I'm going to talk through some of those ideas with you briefly. So the first thing I'm saying is that we're in this too. We're all in this together because we believe that this is a collective effort for which the benefit and value are far more likely to be realized when we are mindful and committed to strong working relationships. Additionally, we're all in this because we're trying to make a difference. And if we all can remember throughout this process that Local Government Commission, you guys as partners and the fellows are trying to make a difference, we can hopefully unify around that. One of the tools that we have at our disposal is communication. So often the barrier to success is poor communication. And if we can communicate with you, if we can be clear about our goals and needs, if the fellows can be clear, if you can be clear to us, things are going to work better. And finally, you've all chosen to participate in CivicSpark, and we really want you to, we think you see this as valuable, and so we need you to support our core activities, the stuff I outlined before, so that we can be effective and remain aligned with our mission. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your role first. couple bullets here. Again, this is coming out of the MOU or shared expectations document that we'll be sharing soon, but I just want to highlight them here, the concepts behind them. So we're hoping and we believe that we want you to engage around supporting the program goals and the fellow's obligation to the program. We have requirements. We want to make sure that the fellow is staying within allowable activities. We want to make sure that if regional coordinators need to be informed, they're brought in. We want to have your support to make sure that our capacity building activities are successful, setting goals, getting those pre and post surveys done, making sure that you review the gap assessments so that what you want to do is reflected in what we define as the goals for the fellows. Supporting the fellows' professional development by giving them a great project. That's the easy one, in fact, for most of you. But by participating in their performance assessment steps, helping give guidance on their day-to-day tasks and evaluating timelines, and keeping us informed if there's any challenges so we can all work to resolve them. Setting and establishing a professional experience for the fellow, you all do that by providing an office space, the technology, the support, but ensure also that your other staff are aware of their role and support and understand their purpose in being there. Address issues and concerns with the fellow and provide supportive, clear feedback as needed, and tell us if something is not working. And then finally, supporting the fellow's progress through that consistent communication to make sure that we're all clear about what the expectations are and if change needs to happen. It's also important that you make sure that any key staff involved are aware of the details in our agreement, the stuff about, having an hourly meeting, participating, reporting, etc. Too often we find a partner who is there really engaged, but they don't really socialize CivicSpark across the organization, and that can lead to some friction. We definitely also want you to appreciate your fellow, recognize the work they're doing and how it's different from what other things are going on. Connect with them, make sure that you stick with those check-ins, and keep us informed. I think I've said that about 5 times now, but it is really important to always keep us in the loop so we can be as helpful as possible. A couple thoughts here about mentorship. Many of you have done an exceptional job of being mentors to your fellows. It's wonderful. It's one of the reasons we really value you as partners. We don't expect everyone to be a mentor. It's not something that you can quantify in a really formal way, but some thoughts about what makes an effective mentor as far as being engaged with the fellow, looking out for their needs, looking beyond the project need and the day-to-day, and thinking about it from their perspective. The reason you guys are so often mentors is because they're coming into your organization, you're opening a door, and they're joining this program for a learning opportunity, so they're looking for that relationship from you or from other people in the organization. And it's important because it not only builds their development, but it often helps you realize your goals. To sort of put a fine point on things I've said along the way, always want you to remember these are fellows, not interns, they're not consultants, they're not employees. They are fellows who are serving in a different way, and their service is not work, right? They don't get paid hourly, they're on a fixed living allowance, they're there to serve and support. So, try and refrain from calling their activities work. It's hard kind of vocabulary, but it does help. Recognize they're not making any more when they work longer hours. Recognize the hardship they're taking for your community. Make sure you keep their work sort of in the sort of boundaries that we have so that they can stay true to that purpose and that mission. A little bit about what we are doing and how we're doing it. Our staff as a whole, we have our purpose as well. And I'll just say that I think our #1 job is to uphold the core mission of the program. It's to make sure that we're delivering a strong program and value for the communities. We're building capacity, we're building leadership, all of those things. We're trying to build and maintain relationships with you and with the fellows to hold both of those in our hands. We don't represent one or the other per se. I know sometimes it feels like we spend most of our time with the fellows, but we really do serve you as well. We're also trying to support effective communication of our program needs and activities. Content like this is meant to illuminate how we do things and why we do it. And then we lead and promote our overall program activities like regional training, statewide calls, etc. You're familiar, I think, with the team by now. You know about our relationship with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, which we have reestablished this year, I think, pretty strongly. And you may or may not be as cognizant of the fact that we're funded through the Corporation for National Community Service and California Volunteers, but that's where we get our resources from. I won't go into this, don't expect you to digest it. Wanted you to see that we do have an organizational structure. It's a little different than it's been in the past. I am the full program director now since Kristen Wraithwall left. I took that on and lifted up Chris and Ariadna and Mackenzie as managers, and we've broken up the organization into four main areas. And then they have some staff under them. Your point of contact is mostly the regional coordinators, as you know. All the regional coordinators that we have currently are staying on, which is wonderful, so we'll have some good continuity there. A little bit that, again, you'll have these slides, but just thought it would be useful for you to know what do I do, what do the other managers do, what are these areas of our operation. Mackenzie is leading the regional coordinators in what we call implementation, and that's where you mostly interface with us. But Ariadna does our operations, our compliance work. Chris is leading our network development, sort of helping build our story, and then I provide overall program direction and strategic planning. The regional coordinator is, of course, where you guys, the folks you know best and engage most with you. And what they do is really support you and the fellow to ensure the program is implemented successfully. They act as a team coordinator, a liaison to the program. They also work on program compliance and reporting, and then they're a mediator as needed to represent if there's challenges. They're your primary point of contact. They conduct those regular check-ins, bi-weekly with fellows, monthly with you. They do 3 site visits a year, and hopefully through all that process provide a good support for everybody's experience. A little bit more about the roles. As team coordinator and liaison, they provide that direct support to the fellow. They coordinate professional development and service activities in their region, the regional trainings, the service days, the volunteer engagement project, and ideally they're providing regular engagement to support a positive experience. They're also our frontline staff to ensure the program remains aligned with allowable activities to support that accurate and timely reporting that we have to do. And then where necessary, they can be a mediator. So working with a fellow or site supervisor to understand issues, address them directly, encourage folks to address them between each other, strive to serve and advocate for both fellows and partners' needs. Again, I can't emphasize enough, we're trying not to be seen as just an ally or confidant of the fellow, but also you. And so we want to always lift up and centralize conversations where necessary so that everybody's being heard, and hopefully we can resolve them. If necessary, we can move into some structured corrective actions. And of course, if the significant issues are raised, we will alert our human resources staff who may need to take those things up. I'm not going to say a whole lot about fellows because what I've said during implementation is what the fellows do. And so we've really talked about that, but these are the key points we'll be putting into that shared expectation document about their role and their expectations. We want them to support the program goals as well by serving on projects that address capacity building, by identifying strategies to advance those projects. We need them to represent their identity as a CivicSpark AmeriCorps fellow by wearing their uniform, by identifying as a fellow and describing their service to stakeholders. We want them to engage in service through a professional attitude and action. And this is things like actually arriving on time, ready to serve, following a weekly work schedule, serving their full period of time, notifying you guys if something changes, creating a plan if they're not on track, trying to maintain their flexibility and adaptability in all activities. This is uncertain territory everybody's working in. And so when a fellow comes into your organization, we want them to have an open mind to working in areas that are different than they may be expected, to take on tasks, to hear and learn from you how things need to be done, how things need to be communicated, to be open to discovering through this process what it is that they can do and how they can make a difference. And we hope that they engage and advocate for their personal growth and development by communicating their desires and needs, identifying training opportunities, and advocating for guidance on prioritization and deadlines so that they can achieve success and learn by that process. In the last couple minutes, I'll touch on just a couple of program next steps. Our calendar for the year is up here. We got a couple TBD dates because we're not 100% sure, but we're coming in on the start of the service year. Orientation in Coloma will be 9/3 through 9/7, and they will be showing up on your doorstep on Tuesday the 10th. We're giving them a day off because we finish on a Saturday during orientation. So if we don't fill spots, this should actually say 10-2. We can fill fellow spots up until October 2nd, and that's the last day that somebody could fulfill a full-time service here. We're hoping all the initial performance assessments and stuff are done by November, and then you can see some of the latter part calendar for the rest of the year. Our holidays, they're the same as they were last year as far as what they are. As always, we are required to offer them off, but fellows can work with you about what days they want to take off. Some key next steps. I hope we are all deep into this right now because we are only 4 weeks away from our start. So make sure that your local government beneficiary information is complete. We will be sending you reminders. They're mostly coming from existing regional coordinators and not me, though I am handling, or Mackenzie is handling, the routing of candidates, and sometimes I get involved in the contract conversations. But want to make sure the pre-assessments are done, want to make sure the service agreement is in place. When we give you the program guide, make sure you review it and get your logistical stuff set up. I can't emphasize enough, if you're in the middle of interviewing, move. We've got 4 weeks, which means if somebody's going to relocate and they're going to need time to get here by September 3rd, we want offers out this week or next so that they have time to adjust. Please, please, please don't delay on interviewing. The same thing with the service agreement. If it's kicking around your legal or contracts folks, go knock on their door and shake them. I don't want to be in a situation where you've got a fellow who's accepted and they can't show up at your doorstep because we don't have an agreement in place. So please move those along. Same thing with service agreements. Those, not service agreements, the pre-service capacity assessments, a little less urgent. Those can get done at the last minute, but those service agreements, those interviews, please put your time and effort now into getting those completed. So a couple other things, stay connected. We've got Facebook, we have a story map. If you're not already on our partner network, get in touch with me. We have a listserv, we have a quarterly meeting, totally optional. Some of you on this call I know came to the last partner meeting. It was fantastic, really appreciated it. We're hoping to make it a good peer forum. Our newsletter, we're trying to feature more partners on in the future. So hopefully that will be something of value to you. So all of this content comes from the pre-service packet we sent you, the service agreement that you have already, the exhibits part of it, and the program guide to come. So you can refer back to that, but I will be sharing this out. So with that, and the couple of minutes I have remaining, I would love to take any questions you have. You can type them in, you can raise your hand, and I can open the line for you. And this is that awkward moment where I try and fill airtime while people type or they don't have questions, and it's potentially because you are all such experienced partners that this all felt very comfortable to you and familiar. Any questions? Somebody's got to have one question. Don't leave me hanging here. Well, not seeing any questions coming in because you guys are such experienced partners, I guess. I'm going to end this webinar exactly at 12. Let you all go free for your lunches or wherever you're going. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being a partner in CivicSpark. As always, want you to know how honored we are to be able to work with you and support your communities. And we're looking forward to an amazing year. And we'll wish you the best Thursday.